his performance seemed to drop off. So he came up with the idea that he was going to cover his body in wax. Okay? And he was going to prevent sweating from happening, so that way he could run faster. Okay? And unfortunately, he collapsed about 30 kilometers into the marathon, and he died the next morning. So this is way back in 1912. So he actually had the idea, and he was thinking, you know, ahead of his time. Unfortunately, it just didn't work out so well. What he didn't realize is that sweat's actually pretty important. So when we sweat, what's actually happening is you're removing heat from your body. So it's not so much that sweat's cooling you off, it's that when sweat evaporates, it removes heat from your body, and so he prevented himself from removing heat. So all of a sudden his core temperature went up dramatically, and that's why he collapsed. So we're going to talk a little bit about hydration and sweat, etc. So when it comes to hydration status, there's several different factors. Okay, so you can take in fluids, obviously from drinks, but also food. Okay, and we can lose fluid from things like urine, feces, sweat, and respiration. And the balance act between those is our hydration status. So once you lose more than 2% of your body weight, whether it's from sweat or anything else, if you lose 2% of your body weight from fluids, that means you are now dehydrated. That's our dehydration classification, so 2% or more of your body weight. Okay, so what happens once you've dehydrated? So we all taste, like you've tasted your sweat, you felt your sweat, and it's pretty gritty and salty, right? Okay, but interestingly enough, your sweat is actually much less concentrated than your blood. So as you lose fluid in the form of sweat, the concentration of your blood goes up and your blood becomes a little bit thicker. And so now your heart has to work a lot harder. And so as we get dehydrated, for every % of body weight you lose, your heart rate goes up by about 3 to 5 beats per minute because it has to work harder. Okay, but you're trying to cool your body off, and so your muscle needs more blood, your skin needs more blood, and your digestive tract needs blood. And so now that we've got this thicker blood, you can imagine it's a little bit harder to get to all those organs. Okay, so we start to see some sort of performance drop off when that happens because stomach tends to get upset, we're not able to cool ourselves off as effectively, and overall we start to feel the issues of fatigue, increased, the perceived exertion goes up, we start to have headaches, performance starts to drop off. And so we don't want that to happen. We want to try and maintain our hydration status as best as possible. So you have to factor in what all affects sweat. Why does one person sweat more than the other? So temperature, obviously, the hotter it gets, the more you're going to sweat, but also humidity. So I mentioned earlier, when you sweat, it's meant to evaporate. But when it's humid, sweat has a harder time evaporating. And so you don't remove heat quite as effectively, so we have to sweat more. So here in Houston, we get the satisfaction of sweating a little bit more than in a drier climate. Okay. Also factors are what clothing you wear. So the more clothes you wear, the hotter it is for you, and the harder it is for you to, again, evaporate or remove that sweat. Okay, so that can be a challenge. Okay, the size of the athlete, the genetics, the rate that athlete's running. So the better the athlete, the faster they go, the harder they train, the more they tend to sweat. Okay, so the elite athletes tend to sweat a little bit more than the first-time marathoners, etc. So there's all sorts of different variations in sweat rate. Okay, so what we want to think about now is what can we do to try and keep our hydration status in check? What can we do to minimize dehydration? So first thing is actually think about prepping in advance of your run, right? So you don't want to enter into that run dehydrated already. If that happens, then it's going to take longer for you to sweat. It's going to take longer for you to, or it's going to raise your core temperature more before we finally start to cool off a little bit. Okay, so you want to start off your runs hydrated. So that means the days leading up to it, or the day before, the morning of, you want to be drinking plenty of fluids. Okay, so 2 things that I suggest is 1, pay attention to your thirst cues. Okay, so if you're thirsty, what actually that's signaling is that you're deficient in fluids. And so if you're thirsty constantly, like yesterday, if you were feeling thirsty all day and you know you have a run today, then you want to drink a little bit more fluids. You want to pay attention to that. Urine color is the other one. So if your urine color is very dark, that's usually a signal that we're a little bit dehydrated. So I know it sounds kind of funky and weird, but you want to look at your pee and you want to see what does it look like. If it's pale, if it's clear, that's usually a good sign. If it's closer to apple juice, that's not such a good sign, right? So if we're thirsty, and our urine color is dark leading up to a run, then we know our hydration status isn't quite where it needs to be. So we need to be paying a little closer attention to that.
Can some vitamin supplements turn your urine yellow?
Vitamin supplements can alter, certain vitamin supplements, and I can't remember all the ones that would do that, but it can potentially. Ultimately, still paying attention to that's going to be helpful, though, and paying attention to your thirst. Okay. The other thing is then once we start running, how much do you need? And that changes for everyone. So I mentioned there's a wide variety of factors that affect sweat, and so the best thing that you can do is pay attention to yourself. Okay. Measure your weight before and after runs and see what's happening. So if you're losing greater than 2% of your body weight, that shows that we're a bit dehydrated. So if you're 150 pounds, you shouldn't be losing much more than 3 pounds. If you're 200 pounds, we shouldn't be losing much more than 4 pounds. Okay, so what you do is weigh yourself before, dry off, weigh yourself after, and that will give you an indication, am I getting enough fluids? If you're exceeding that 2% loss, then you may want to start to think about drinking a little bit more fluids. You can even, if you're curious about it, you can even start to measure the actual number itself. So every pound of sweat you lose is equivalent to about 16 ounces of fluid. So that means if you lose 2 pounds, that means you need about 32 ounces of fluid during that run to keep your body at a normal hydration status or at a balance. Okay, it is okay to lose some fluid. We're expecting you to, but I wouldn't promote trying to lose much more than 2% of your body weight. Once you do that, that's when we're going to see performance drop off, especially in really hot temperatures. Colder temperatures, you can sometimes get away with that a little bit easier. The other things that you want to do is make sure that you're keeping your fluids cold. Okay, if your fluid is cold, I know that sounds very simple, but if it's cold, you're more likely to drink it. We tend to see people drink it more efficiently. They're more inclined to drink because it's cold. Also, that can actually cool your core temperature off. So if you're drinking ice cold water versus a neutral temperature water, that's actually going to have a greater effect on bringing core temperature down. And then also trying to make sure that which fluids do you need. So a run like today, water is perfectly fine. 2 miles, water is fine. You're starting to get up to a fact of where we're going an hour and a half or longer, that's when we want to start to use something like a sports drink to provide some carbohydrate to go along with fluid.